There comes a moment when a person can no longer run from what their heart has known for years. And your soulmate has just reached that moment. They looked at everything they tried to build without you, every choice they made to move forward, every person they allowed close to them, and suddenly one truth became impossible to deny. You are still the person their heart chooses. You are the person they can actually imagine beside them forever. And what happened after that realization may change this entire story. Listen carefully, because this realization did not come quietly. Something triggered it. A conversation. A memory. A question about the future that forced them to stop pretending they were completely happy with the direction their life was taking. Someone asked them where they truly saw themselves years from now, and for a few seconds they couldn't answer. Because the first face that entered their mind was yours. They tried to shake it off. They told themselves it was only nostalgia. They reminded themselves of the distance, the misunderstandings, the silence, and everything that had happened between you. But the harder they tried to push your memory away, the clearer something became. They weren't missing an old chapter, they were missing the person they still wanted in their future. And that frightened them. Because admitting they still cared about you was one thing. Admitting they wanted you forever was completely different. Suddenly, all those little memories began returning with a different meaning. The way you understood things they never had to explain. The way your presence could calm them when nobody else knew what was happening inside them. The conversations they once took for granted. The moments when you stood beside them without asking what you would receive in return. They started comparing those memories with the life in front of them now. And the comparison hurt. Because there are people who can make life exciting for a moment, but very few people can make someone feel understood, protected, and emotionally at home. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that difference now. Don't skip this, because this is where their realization became much more serious. They didn't simply sit there thinking about you. They made a decision. For the first time in a long time, they stopped asking, "What will everyone else think?" and started asking, "What happens if I lose this person forever?" That question hit them harder than anything else. Because suddenly they imagined you moving forward without them. They imagined someone else recognizing your value. Someone else receiving the loyalty, affection, patience, and love they once had the opportunity to protect. They imagined hearing one day that you had finally closed the door. And something inside them panicked. Not because they wanted to control your life. Because they finally understood that time would not wait forever. Your soulmate knows there may have been moments when their actions made you question everything. There may have been silence when you deserved an explanation. Distance when you needed courage from them. There may even have been outside voices that convinced them to doubt something their own heart already understood. But those voices are becoming weaker now. Your absence has taught them something your presence never could. What you gave them was rare. And now they are facing the possibility that they may have realized it almost too late. That is why something big may be approaching. Your soulmate is no longer thinking only about how they feel. They are thinking about what they are willing to do about those feelings. A message has crossed their mind more than once. A conversation they have avoided is becoming impossible to avoid. Words they buried are beginning to rise again. And there is one sentence they desperately want the courage to say to you. I finally know who I want beside me. But before they can say it, there is something they believe they must handle first. Something connected to the past. Something that once stood between the two of you. And this time, instead of running away from it, your soulmate may finally be preparing to confront it. Because they understand one terrifying truth now. If they remain silent much longer, the person they finally realize they want forever may no longer be waiting when they return, and this is where everything begins to shift, because your soulmate is no longer asking themselves whether they still have feelings for you. That question has already been answered. The real question haunting them now is much harder. Do I still have a chance to make this right? They know wanting you forever means nothing if they continue hiding behind fear, pride, family pressure, or the mistakes that created this distance in the first place. For the first time, they are looking directly at the damage instead of pretending time will somehow repair it for them. Recently, someone close to them noticed the change. Your soulmate had become quieter. They were distracted during conversations, staring at their phone longer than usual, opening something and closing it again without sending anything. Finally, this person asked the question your soulmate had been avoiding. Is this about them? Your soulmate didn't answer immediately. They didn't need to. Their silence revealed enough. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of denying it, they finally admitted, I think I made the biggest mistake of my life when I let them go. Those words changed the entire conversation. Because once your soulmate said them aloud, they couldn't hide behind excuses anymore. They began talking about the moments they still remembered, the conversations they replayed late at night, and the things they wished they had done differently. They admitted there were times they wanted to contact you but stopped themselves. Sometimes it was pride. Sometimes fear. Sometimes they convinced themselves you were probably happier without them. But beneath every excuse was the same painful truth. They were terrified that you might tell them it was already too late. Don't skip this, because what happened next pushed them even closer toward making a serious decision. The person listening to them didn't comfort them with easy words. Instead, they asked, if you already know this is the person you want, what exactly are you waiting for? Your soulmate had no answer. And that question stayed with them long after the conversation ended. They carried it into the night. They carried it into the next morning. Every time they tried to ignore it, it returned stronger. Then your soulmate did something they had avoided for a very long time. They began looking back, not just at the beautiful memories, but at the exact moment everything started falling apart. They remembered what was said, who became involved, what assumptions were made, and which conversation should have happened but never did. And suddenly they recognized something disturbing. Your story may not have ended because the love disappeared. It may have ended because neither of you ever received the complete truth at the right time. That realization shook them deeply. Because now they are questioning things they once accepted without investigation. They are remembering warnings from other people, old conversations that never completely made sense, and decisions they made while emotional. Your soulmate is beginning to wonder whether someone else's opinion carried too much weight. Whether fear was disguised as advice. Whether they walked away from something precious because they trusted the wrong version of the story. And now they want answers. They are no longer satisfied with memories. They want to know what really happened. They want to know what you were feeling when everything collapsed. Most importantly, they want to know whether there is still something alive between you that neither distance nor time managed to completely destroy. But there is another reason this has suddenly become urgent. Your soulmate recently learned something they were never expecting to hear, something connected to the person who influenced one of the biggest decisions made during your separation. And when they heard what this person had apparently admitted, your soulmate immediately asked one question. Why wasn't I told this before? The room went silent. Because the answer could expose exactly why the two of you lost so much time. And your soulmate has decided they are finally going to confront the person who knows the truth. Your soulmate did not sleep peacefully after hearing those words. That one question, why wasn't I told this before, kept repeating in their mind because suddenly pieces of the past were beginning to connect in a way they never had before. Conversations that once seemed harmless now felt suspicious. Advice they had trusted now sounded different. And most painfully, they started remembering moments when you had tried to explain yourself, but they were too overwhelmed, too hurt, or too influenced by other voices to truly listen. The next day, your soulmate finally confronted the person who had been holding back the truth. There was no casual conversation this time. No pretending everything was fine. Your soulmate looked directly at them and asked, "Did you know something back then that you never told me?" At first, the person tried to avoid answering. They changed the subject. They said too much time had passed. They claimed reopening old wounds wouldn't help anyone. But your soulmate refused to let them escape. Because this wasn't simply about the past anymore. This was about you. And about the future your soulmate suddenly realized they still wanted with you. Finally, the person admitted something your soulmate had never expected. They confessed that during the time your relationship was falling apart, they had information that could have changed the way your soulmate understood everything. They knew there had been a misunderstanding. They knew some of the things being said about you weren't completely accurate. But instead of correcting the story, they remained silent because they believed separating the two of you was the better decision. Your soulmate froze. For years, they had carried one version of what happened. Now that version was collapsing in front of them. They asked, "So you watched me walk away believing something that wasn't completely true?" There was no immediate answer. And that silence hurt more than any confession could have. Your soulmate stood up and walked away because suddenly they understood how much time had been lost. They thought about birthdays that passed without you. Holidays. Quiet nights. Important moments. Years when the two of you could have been building memories instead of living separate lives because fear, misunderstanding, and outside influence had been allowed to speak louder than love. But something surprising happened inside them. They didn't only feel anger. They felt determination. Because your soulmate realized they could spend another year blaming the past, or they could finally do something about the future. Don't skip this, because this is where their feelings turned into action. They went somewhere private, took out their phone, and searched for something connected to you. Maybe it was an old message. Maybe a photograph. Maybe your contact that they never truly had the courage to delete. Whatever it was, seeing your name again made their heart race. Their finger hovered over the screen. For a moment, fear returned. What if you don't answer? What if you have moved on? What if the damage is too deep? But then another thought became stronger than all of them. What if I stay silent and lose them forever? That was the moment everything changed. Your soulmate began writing. The first message was too long, so they erased it. The second sounded too cold, so they erased that too. They tried again because there were years of emotion behind words that suddenly felt impossible to arrange. Finally, they stopped trying to make it perfect. They decided to make it true. They wrote something simple. Something they had wanted to tell you for much longer than you realize. I know things now that I didn't know before. And if you'll allow me, I need to talk to you. But before they pressed send, another message appeared on their phone. It came from someone connected to the situation they had just confronted. Your soulmate opened it. And what they read made them immediately stand up. Because apparently there was still one final piece of the story nobody had told them. Something involving you. Something that could explain why you never came back when they secretly hoped you would. And after reading the last sentence, your soulmate whispered, "They were waiting for me too." Those 5 words, "They were waiting for me too," changed something inside your soulmate instantly. For years, they had convinced themselves that the silence between you meant you had stopped caring. They believed that if you truly wanted them, you would have returned, called, written, or somehow found a way to break through the distance. That belief became the excuse they used whenever your memory became too painful. But now they were discovering something completely different. You hadn't simply disappeared. You hadn't forgotten everything. There had been a time when you were waiting for them to make the move they were too afraid to make. Your soulmate read the message again and again, almost hoping they had misunderstood it. But the meaning remained the same. Someone who had been close enough to witness what happened back then finally admitted that after the separation, you had asked about your soulmate more than once. You wanted to know whether they were okay. You wanted to know whether they ever spoke about you. And at one point, you had apparently said something that nobody ever passed along to them: "If they ever come to me with the truth, I will listen." Your soulmate had never heard those words. Not once. And realizing that nearly broke them. They sat there staring at the screen, thinking about all the years they had spent assuming the door was locked when perhaps it had once been slightly open. They remembered nights when they almost contacted you. They remembered typing your name and then stopping. They remembered convincing themselves that reaching out would only disturb your life. Now they were forced to face the possibility that both of you had been standing on opposite sides of the same silence, each waiting for the other person to prove that the love had mattered. That realization hurt differently. Because some regrets come from making the wrong decision. But the deepest regrets often come from making no decision at all. Your soulmate suddenly understood how much fear had controlled this story. Fear of rejection. Fear of looking foolish. Fear of admitting they still cared. Fear of upsetting family members. Fear of reopening something everyone else told them was finished. Every time their heart pushed them toward you, fear gave them another reason to wait. And every time they waited, another week became another month became another year, and eventually the distance began to look permanent. But something inside them has changed now. They don't want another year of wondering. They don't want to wake up someday and discover that the opportunity they were afraid to take no longer exists. And more importantly, they no longer want other people deciding what happens between the two of you. For the first time, your soulmate is beginning to understand that if there is going to be an ending to this story, they want that ending to come from an honest conversation between you and them, not from rumors, assumptions, family pressure, pride, or someone else's interpretation of what either of you supposedly felt. So they went back to the message they had been writing. I know things now that I didn't know before. And if you'll allow me, I need to talk to you. They stared at those words. Then they added another sentence. I should have had this conversation with you a long time ago. Their hands were trembling because suddenly this wasn't imagination anymore. This wasn't another late-night moment where they allowed themselves to miss you privately before returning to their normal life the next morning. This was action. Once they sent those words, there would be no hiding from what they truly felt. They started remembering your face during one of the last serious conversations you shared. At the time, your soulmate had been so focused on defending their own pain that they hadn't noticed something important in yours. You weren't asking them to solve everything immediately. You were asking them to believe that what existed between you deserved one honest chance. Now they understood. And that understanding came with a painful question. Why did it take losing you for me to understand what you were asking me to protect? Your soulmate lowered the phone and closed their eyes. For several minutes, they simply sat there. Their mind traveled through years of memories, the first time they realized they cared about you, the first serious disagreement, the moments you made them laugh when they were carrying things nobody else knew about, the promises that were never completely fulfilled, and finally the day everything became too complicated. But one memory stood above all the others. It was something you had said before the distance became permanent. At the time, they thought it was only emotion speaking. Now they realized it may have been a warning. You had essentially told them that one day they might understand what they were losing, but by then you didn't know whether you would still have the strength to keep waiting. Your soulmate finally understands those words. And that is exactly why they are afraid now. Not afraid of loving you. Afraid they understood their love too late. But instead of allowing that fear to stop them again, they are trying to use it as courage. They picked up the phone. Opened your name again. Read the message one final time. And just before pressing send, they received a call. The name appearing on the screen shocked them. It was the same person whose influence had once helped create distance between the two of you. Your soulmate almost ignored it. But something told them to answer. The moment they did, the person on the other end didn't waste time with greetings. They said, "Before you contact them, there's something else you need to know." Your soulmate's entire body went still. They asked, what else could possibly be left? There was silence. Then came the confession. Apparently, there had been one final attempt from your side years ago, an attempt your soulmate never knew about. A message had been sent. Not a casual message. Not a simple hello. It was something much deeper. Something meant to explain what you had truly felt when everything fell apart. But your soulmate never received it. And when they demanded to know why, the answer left them furious. Someone had deliberately decided that your message should never reach them. Your soulmate stood up immediately. You had no right. The person tried to explain that everyone believed they were protecting your soulmate from more pain. They claimed emotions were too intense at the time. They said both of you needed to move forward. They insisted they believed they were doing the right thing. But your soulmate wasn't listening anymore. Because there are some decisions nobody has the right to make for another person's heart. And this had been one of them. Your soulmate asked only one question. What did the message say? The person hesitated. Your soulmate demanded the truth. Finally, they revealed the part they still remembered. You had written that despite everything that happened, you never wanted your soulmate to believe your love had been fake. You had said you were stepping away because you couldn't keep fighting against people, circumstances, and silence alone. But if your soulmate ever discovered the complete truth and genuinely wanted to talk, you would not refuse an honest conversation. Your soulmate couldn't speak. Because suddenly they weren't looking at the past the same way anymore. They were looking at a missed opportunity. And the person responsible for hiding it was finally admitting what they had done. Your soulmate ended the call without another word. Then they looked at your name again. But this time there was no hesitation. No deleting. No rewriting. No asking what everyone else would think. They pressed send. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then 1 minute passed. Then another. Your soulmate kept staring at the screen, their heartbeat getting faster with every second. They began wondering whether your number had changed. Whether they had waited too long. Whether life had finally carried you somewhere they could no longer reach. Then suddenly, the screen changed. Their message had been delivered. Your soulmate stopped breathing for a moment. Because after all those years, something had finally crossed the distance between you. But they still didn't know whether you would answer. Minutes later, another change appeared on the screen. The message had been opened. Your soulmate's hands began trembling again. They waited. Nothing. They walked across the room. Came back. Checked the phone. Still nothing. And just when they started believing your silence might be the answer they had feared, 3 little dots appeared. You were typing. Your soulmate froze. The dots disappeared. Then returned. Then disappeared again. It looked as though you were struggling with what to say too. Finally, a message came through. It wasn't long. But the moment your soulmate read it, their eyes filled with tears. Because your response contained one sentence they never expected after everything that happened. I wondered how long it would take you to learn the truth. Your soulmate read it twice. Then a third time. And suddenly they realized something enormous. You knew more about what had happened than they ever understood. But before they could reply, another message arrived from you. And this one changed the direction of everything. If we're finally going to talk, there is something you need to hear from me before anyone else tells you their version. Your soulmate stared at those words. Because after years of silence, the conversation they once believed would never happen was finally beginning. And whatever you were about to reveal could determine whether this becomes a final goodbye, or the first step toward the forever they have finally realized they want with you. Your soulmate stared at your message for what felt like an eternity. If we're finally going to talk, there is something you need to hear from me before anyone else tells you their version. Those words carried a weight they could feel immediately. This wasn't going to be a simple conversation about missing each other. It wasn't going to be two people exchanging apologies and pretending the lost years didn't matter. There was something deeper buried underneath everything that had happened, and for the first time, you were about to tell them the story from your side without anyone standing between you. Your soulmate typed, "Tell me. I'm listening." Then they waited. For several minutes, there was nothing. Those 3 little dots appeared, disappeared, and appeared again. Your soulmate could almost imagine you sitting somewhere with your phone in your hands, deciding how much of the truth you were finally willing to reveal. They knew they had no right to rush you. After everything that happened, the least they could do was give you the space to speak. Finally, your message arrived. You told them there had been a moment years ago when you were prepared to fight for the relationship one final time. You had reached a point where you were exhausted by misunderstandings, outside opinions, and the feeling that every private emotion between the two of you somehow became a discussion for everyone else. But despite that exhaustion, you still believed there was something worth saving. So you made one last attempt. You sent the message they never received. And then you waited. 1 day. 2 days. A week. You kept hoping they would respond. But nothing came. Eventually, the silence began to feel like an answer. Your soulmate felt their chest tighten as they read those words because they now knew something you hadn't known at the time. They had never seen that message. While you were waiting for an answer, they were living under the belief that you had chosen to disappear. While they were waiting for a sign from you, you were waiting for a response from them. Two people were still emotionally connected. Two people were still hoping. And yet both believed the other had stopped caring. Your soulmate immediately replied, "I never got it. I swear to you, I never saw that message." There was a long pause. Then your response came. "I know that now." Those 4 words hit them hard. Because it meant you had eventually discovered at least part of what happened. Your soulmate asked when you learned the truth. You explained that much later, someone accidentally revealed something during a conversation. It wasn't a complete confession, but it was enough for you to realize your final message may never have reached its intended destination, and when you learned that, part of you wanted to contact your soulmate immediately. But another part of you stopped. Because too much time had passed. Too much pain had accumulated. And you didn't know whether they had built another life. You didn't want to walk back into their world simply because someone else had finally admitted a mistake. So you stayed silent. Your soulmate lowered the phone. They suddenly understood something devastating. Both of you had been protecting yourselves from rejection that neither of you had actually given the other. Years of distance had been built around assumptions. And now those assumptions were collapsing. Your soulmate wrote another message. This one took longer. "I can't give us those years back. But I don't want to lose another year because I was afraid to tell you the truth." They pressed send. Your response didn't come immediately. And that silence frightened them more than they wanted to admit. But this time, your soulmate didn't run. They didn't delete the conversation. They didn't convince themselves that silence automatically meant rejection. They simply waited. Because they were finally learning something they should have understood years ago. Love cannot survive if every uncomfortable moment becomes an excuse to disappear. Eventually, your reply arrived. "Then tell me the truth." Your soulmate took a deep breath. And this was the moment they stopped hiding. They admitted that they had tried to move forward. They admitted there were moments when they pretended they had completely forgotten you because admitting otherwise felt humiliating. They admitted they had compared other connections to what they once had with you. They admitted there were places, songs, dates, and ordinary moments that still brought your memory back without warning. But then they wrote something they had never said to anyone so clearly before. "I thought missing you would eventually stop. It didn't. I just became better at hiding it." Your soulmate stared at that sentence after sending it. There was no taking it back now. Their heart was exposed. But strangely, instead of feeling weak, they felt relieved. For years they had carried those feelings privately. Now you finally knew. Then came your response. Why now? That question stopped them. Because you deserved more than a romantic answer. You deserved something real. So your soulmate told you about the recent conversation that had forced them to think about their future. They told you how imagining the years ahead suddenly made everything clear. They explained that when they stripped away expectations, fear, pride, and everyone else's opinions, there was still one person they imagined beside them. You. They wrote. I realized I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was afraid of reaching the end of my life knowing I let the person I truly loved become a memory because I was too afraid to fight for them. Your soulmate's eyes filled with tears after sending it. But they weren't finished. They continued. I don't know what you feel now. I don't know what your life looks like. And I won't pretend I deserve another chance simply because I've finally understood my mistakes. But I needed you to know that when I think about the person I want beside me for the rest of my life, I still think of you. This time, your reply took much longer. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Your soulmate started walking around the room again. They wondered whether they had said too much. Whether the confession had overwhelmed you. Whether you were preparing to tell them that the past needed to remain in the past. But then your message arrived. There was a time when I would have given anything to hear you say that. Your soulmate's heart sank. The words sounded like both love and goodbye. They immediately asked, and now? You didn't answer directly. Instead, you wrote, now I need to know whether you want me because you're emotional about the past. Or because you're actually prepared to build something different in the future. That question changed everything. Because you weren't asking whether they loved you. You were asking whether they had changed enough to protect that love. Your soulmate knew this couldn't be answered with another beautiful sentence. So they didn't try. They told you they understood why you were cautious. They told you they weren't asking you to erase what happened. They weren't asking for instant forgiveness. And they weren't expecting the relationship to magically return to what it once was. They wanted something more mature than that. A beginning built on truth. No hidden conversations. No allowing outsiders to decide what happens between you. No disappearing when things become difficult. No assuming what the other person feels instead of asking. And most importantly, no promises they weren't prepared to prove through actions. Your soulmate then wrote, don't believe me tonight because I sound sincere. Watch what I do next. You read the message. No immediate response came. Then your soulmate did something even they hadn't planned. They asked whether you would speak with them directly. Not through messages. Not through another person. Just the two of you. They wrote, can I hear your voice? Your soulmate's finger hovered over the phone while they waited. For a moment, there was nothing. Then your reply appeared. Give me 5 minutes. Their heart began pounding. 5 minutes had never felt so long. They walked to a quiet place, sat down, stood up again, tried to think of what they would say first. An apology? Your name? Should they explain everything? Should they simply listen? Then suddenly the phone rang. Your name appeared on the screen. Your soulmate stared at it. Years of memories seemed to collapse into that one moment. They answered. For the first few seconds, neither of you spoke. There was only silence. But this silence was different from the silence that had separated you. This time, both of you were there. Finally, your soulmate whispered your name. And hearing your voice answer almost broke them. You said quietly, "I'm here." Your soulmate closed their eyes. There were 1,000 things they wanted to say, but only one came out. "I'm sorry." You remained quiet. So they continued. They apologized for believing other voices before coming directly to you. They apologized for the times pride kept them silent. They admitted they couldn't undo what happened, and they didn't expect one conversation to heal years of hurt. Then you said something that surprised them. I didn't need you to be perfect. I needed you to choose the conversation instead of choosing the silence. Your soulmate couldn't argue with that. Because it was true. And then, for the first time, the two of you began talking about what actually happened, not the version other people told, not the assumptions either of you carried, but the truth as each of you experienced it. Some moments were painful. Some memories were completely different from what your soulmate believed. At one point, they realized you had been blamed for a decision you hadn't even made. At another, you discovered your soulmate had never received information you assumed they had deliberately ignored. Piece by piece, the old story was being rewritten by truth. But then the conversation reached something neither of you expected. Your soulmate asked one final question. If none of those people had interfered, if we had known everything we know now, do you think we would still be together? There was a long silence. Your soulmate almost regretted asking. Then you answered. I don't know what would have happened then. But I know I never stopped wondering what could happen now. Your soulmate's eyes filled with tears. Because that wasn't a promise. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was something they hadn't dared hope for. A door was still open. Then you said there was one condition before either of you could even think about rebuilding anything. Your soulmate immediately agreed to hear it. But when you explained what that condition was, they went completely silent. Because fulfilling it would require them to do something they had avoided for years. Something that would prove whether this realization was only emotion, or whether they were truly ready to choose you openly, courageously, and without allowing anyone else to control the decision ever again. Your condition was simple, but it carried the weight of everything that had happened between you. If you truly want a future with me, don't come back secretly. Don't tell me beautiful things tonight and then become silent when the people around you disagree. If we're going to rebuild anything, I need to know you can stand behind your own decision. Your soulmate went completely quiet. Not because they disagreed. Because they knew you had touched the exact wound that destroyed the relationship before. Years ago, they had loved you privately but allowed fear to influence them publicly. They had listened when others questioned you. They had remained silent when they should have defended the relationship. And now you were making it clear that love without courage would never be enough again. Your soulmate finally answered, "You're right." Then they said something you weren't expecting. "I don't want you to trust another promise. I want to give you a reason to trust my actions." The conversation ended much later that night, but your soulmate didn't sleep. They kept thinking about your voice. About everything you had finally told them. About the years both of you had lost. But most importantly, they thought about what needed to happen next. By morning, their decision was made. They contacted the people whose opinions had once controlled so much of this story. There was no anger. No shouting. No attempt to punish anyone for the past. Your soulmate simply made something very clear. My future will not be decided by anyone except me. Someone tried to remind them of everything that had happened. Someone warned them not to reopen an old chapter. Another person questioned whether you could really be trusted after so much time. But your soulmate didn't collapse under the pressure this time. They answered calmly. I already lost enough time because I listened to everyone except the person I should have spoken to directly. That sentence ended the argument. Because something had genuinely changed. Your soulmate wasn't asking permission anymore. They were taking responsibility. And when the conversation was finished, they immediately contacted you. They didn't tell you every detail. They didn't try to impress you with what they had done. They simply said, I meant what I told you. Nobody else is making this decision for me again. You remained cautious. And your soulmate understood. They knew years of pain couldn't disappear because of one emotional night. So they didn't pressure you. Instead, they began doing something they should have done long ago. They became consistent. When they said they would call, they called. When something uncomfortable came up, they discussed it instead of disappearing. When you asked difficult questions, they answered honestly. When memories became painful, they didn't change the subject. And slowly, something between you began changing. Not returning. Changing. Because neither of you wanted the old relationship back exactly as it had been. That relationship had contained too much silence. Too many assumptions. Too many outside voices. What you both needed was something new. Something stronger. Something built by two people who finally understood exactly what losing each other had cost. Then came the conversation your soulmate had been waiting for. You asked them, when you said you saw me in your future, what did you actually mean? Your soulmate didn't hesitate this time. They said, I don't want another temporary chapter with you. They paused. Then continued. When I imagine growing older, building a peaceful life, having someone beside me when everything else changes, I see you. You became quiet. Your soulmate could hear the emotion in your breathing. Then they said the words that had taken them years to understand. You weren't simply someone I loved. You were the person who felt like home, and I was too distracted by everyone else's noise to understand what that meant. There was no dramatic promise from you. No instant declaration that everything was forgiven. Instead, you said something far more meaningful. Then let's see what happens when we finally do this the right way. Your soulmate smiled. Because that was enough. They weren't asking you to forget the past. They were grateful you were willing to explore the future. And from that moment, the biggest change wasn't some grand announcement. It was the small things. The honesty. The consistency. The conversations that no longer ended in silence. The courage to ask instead of assume. The willingness to stay when something became uncomfortable. For the first time, your soulmate wasn't loving you from a distance while wondering what might have been. They were showing up. And one evening, after another long conversation about the future, your soulmate finally admitted something they had been carrying since the night this entire realization began. They said, "Do you know what scared me the most?" You asked what? They answered, "Realizing I could have spent the rest of my life looking for what I had already found in you." Those words stayed between you for a moment. Then your soulmate continued, "I can't change how long it took me to understand. But I can decide what I do with the truth now. And that is the part of this story that matters most. Sometimes the biggest realization doesn't arrive when everything is easy. Sometimes it comes after distance, after mistakes, after people have tried to move forward, after life has shown them the difference between temporary attention and genuine connection. Your soulmate has finally understood that difference. They understand why your memory remained. Why comparisons never completely stopped. Why certain moments still brought them back to you. Why imagining forever suddenly made one person impossible to ignore. You. But this time, the realization isn't enough. They know love must become action. They know regret must become responsibility. They know words must become consistency. And they know that if they are fortunate enough to receive another opportunity with you, they cannot treat it like something guaranteed. Because losing you once taught them what your presence meant. And finding their way back has taught them something even greater. The person they kept searching for in tomorrow may have been the person their heart recognized years ago. So whatever happens next will not be built on the old story. It will be built on truth, on courage, on two people finally speaking for themselves, and on one realization your soulmate can no longer deny. When they picture the person they want beside them through the years ahead, through every change, every difficult season, every peaceful morning and every uncertain night. They still see you. This time, they don't want to run from that truth. They don't want to hide it. They don't want anyone else deciding what it means. They want the opportunity to prove it. And perhaps that was the something big approaching all along. Not one dramatic moment, but the moment your soulmate finally became brave enough to stop imagining forever with you and start choosing it.